It's 1937. Clouds are gathering on the horizon. Europe is arming. Despite her idyllic position, even Sweden had decided to strengthen her defenses. An additional 70 million kroner were allocated for the purpose. The Swedish air arm was outdated and poorly equipped. The major part of these millions were earmarked for Air Force. Following a visit to the ASJ aircraft division at Linköping, Sweden's Prime Minister Per Albin Hansson made a statement in which he affirmed that as far as possible, Sweden should manufacture her own weapons. On the 26th of April 1937, Svenska Aeroplan Aktiebolaget was established in Trollhättan, an industrial city in western Sweden. The company's share capital of 4 million kroner was divided between the Electrolux and Bofors companies. Peace in our time. There was still hope for peaceful coexistence in Europe.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
But as this newsreel from 1938 shows, the Swedes were playing it safe.
En ny handelsvara har introducerats på den svenska marknaden. Det är militär...
The narrator of the time sums it up with this approach.
Here we see the latest gadget to appear on the market, the gas mask, now available at leading stores. An unpleasant reminder of the imminent threat of war, or just a sign of progress.
SFs reportagekamera har varit I Trollhättan där Sveriges nyaste flyg...
The same year, the newsreel cameras visit Trollhättan and Sweden's newest aircraft plant. It's seen as another step in Sweden's developing aircraft industry, with the main objective of supplying the Swedish Air Force with the planes it needs.
Fackarbetare kommer hädanefter I stor utsträckning att förse vårt flygvapen med maskiner, och vi får väl ta för givet att vi även på detta område ska nå lika hög kvalitet.
Proud of her industrial tradition, Sweden now expects to be self-sufficient in this area too.
Vi har sett några bilder från den stora verkstaden som också inrymmer en lärlingsskola, och här är man I färd med att bygga vingarna I vilka bränslen...
Here we follow the wings being assembled. Our newsreel narrator emphasizes how much effort has been spent on making the plant in Trollhättan as modern and efficient as possible.
Och ingenting har heller sparats på att göra verkstäderna I Trollhättan så moderna och ändamålsenliga som möjligt. Vi har nu kommit in I stora monteringshallen där man är I färd med att montera ihop det första...
We are now entering the main assembly hall where the first Swedish-built bombers are taking shape.
Specialarbetare som behövs för en helt ny industri.
We're also told that there's another aircraft factory in Linköping, also working at maximum capacity.
This is the ASJA factory, a company in the Wallenberg Group, which was then making the American light bomber Northrop 8A1 under license. But Sweden was too small to have two aircraft manufacturers, and in 1939, after some hard bargaining, Saab took over ASJA. Back to the newsreels for a look at dreams far removed from the harsh reality of war. The extravagant new luxury cars from America are given this description by our newsreel narrator.
A look at the improvements on the 1939 models shows streamlined shapes are still popular. Windscreens are bigger, and the gear shift is now on the steering column. Otherwise, the 1939 models are just like the 1938s. They still have 4 wheels, 1 engine, and can be had for a price that, according to the salesman, almost approaches charity. Things haven't changed, have they?
Sverige har fått en ny regering och vi var uppe vid slottet och den gamla...
Again in the newsreel, we see Sweden's new government at the Royal Palace. Prime Minister Per Albin Hansson forms a wartime coalition cabinet with 5 new ministers.
Söndagen den 3 september förklarade England och Frankrike Tyskland krig.
As England and France prepare for war with Germany, Sweden also mobilizes and reinforces its defenses around the country. Here are some typical scenes from Stockholm in those critical days.
Här är några typiska bilder från Stockholm de kritiska dagarna.
Prime Minister Per Albin Hansson makes his famous statement, "We are prepared." Perhaps somewhat optimistic, bearing in mind that Sweden possessed just 54 fighters, 39 light bombers, and 38 heavy bombers.
Hans mössa för trång, hans byxor för smala och hans rock är för lång. Men det gör detsamma för han är...
But despite their neutrality, Swedes are reminded of the need for blackouts. Windows are hastily boarded up. On May the 8th in 1940, Saab's first own design, a Saab 17, flew for the first time. For this maiden flight, the new runway was not yet even ready. The first takeoff was thus made on a 600-meter runway between the factory buildings. A total of 322 Saab 17s were to be built in 2 versions, the B-17 bomber and the S-17 reconnaissance. The Saab 17 remained in active service until 1948. In fact, some 17s were kept in use for towing targets until 1968. On the home front, people were encouraged to keep fit by joining in the national march. Everyone did their 6 miles.
And on the radio, a certain Captain Ugla became famous for his morning exercises, in which he extolled the use of a towel to stretch our muscles. First, the back muscles, and now for some side bends.
Dra bra där.
In a documentary film from 1942, the Swedish people could follow in great detail how a B-17 dive bomber was designed and assembled in the Trollhättan plant, now in full production, just 5 years after Saab had been founded.
Svenska Aeroplanaktiebolaget började sin verksamhet 1938 och 4 år senare levererades den första helsvenska maskinen.
Even in those days, aircraft production was a highly complicated business. Hundreds of blueprints and drawings are needed. Thousands of parts and components are made in the central workshops.
Delar som ett flygplan ursprungligen består av sin första utformning. Varje maskin och arbetare är så placerad att strömmen av arbetsstycken rinner mjukt och jämnt fördelat. Den trygga ordföranden i Saabs verkstadsklubb lägger här sista handen vid fräsmallen till en sprygel. Så här ser
Here the finished wings are stocked. The end of a finely controlled production sequence.
massa arbetsoperationer. Först görs de olika små delarna som tillsammans ska bilda vingen klara att knytas ihop. Det hela liknar ett pussel.
First we see the left wing. Pieces are fitted together like a big jigsaw puzzle. Or so we're told by the enthusiastic narrator. Let us listen in for a moment as he describes each operation in careful detail.
Vänstra vinge behövs det en lång rad jiggar. I vissa jiggar görs vingens framdel, i andra dess bakdel. I ytterligare andra de stora panelerna som bildar översida och undersida, så finns det en annan motsvarande jigsats för den högra vingen. Sen kontrolleras vingens huvuddelar förstås igen innan de kommer i slutjiggen, där de passas samman och nitas ihop. Nithamrarna smattrar som kulsprutor då de hundratals steg för steg sammanfogade plåtbitarna slutligen förenas till en lätt men stark konstruktion. Det är bara en del småarbeten som återstår innan vingarna är alldeles färdiga. Rörledningar och styrlinor, kulsprutor och strålkastare ska in på sina platser innan vingen är klar för den slutliga målningen med flygplanens kamouflagefärger, blekt gråblå och mörkt grågröna toner. Själva flygkroppen byggs naturligtvis också i jigg efter samma...
In the same great detail, we can follow the step-by-step construction of the fuselage. Particular emphasis is made of the fact that the fuselage must be made in two halves. This is to give greater space for the assembly workers.
Istället tillverkas flygkroppen i två halvor, en högerhalva och en vänsterhalva. På det sättet går borrningen och nitningen bekvämare, och de färdiga kroppshalvorna kommer ut ur jiggarna med jämna tidsmellanrum. Sen ska de förenas till en hel cigarrformad flygkropp, och det sker i en särskild jigg.
The center section of the wings is attached to the belly of the fuselage. We now have a sturdy central section for a dive bomber.
In på sin plats och nitas fast. Och därmed är ett robust skrov till en störtbombare färdigt, så när som på en del mindre arbeten av skiftande slag, till exempel att fästa vindrutorna och de skjutbara huvarna och montera hållare för olika utrustningsdetaljer. Ett av de viktigaste momenten härvidlag är fastsättandet av flygkroppens bakre överdel med den spetsiga penan som ska bära upp flygplanets sidoroder. Och när allt det där är gjort arbetar man både utanpå och inuti.
It is now ready to receive the multitude of other items that make up the complete aircraft.
De ska dra in rörledningar och elektriska ledningar.
The hydraulic tubing and electrical wiring.
Kort sagt förse flygplanet med dess komplicerade innanmäte. Medan flygplansskrovet växer fram på sitt håll behandlas detta innanmäte på andra ställen i verkstäderna. Här splitsas styrinrättningens smidiga stållinor, reglagen sätts ihop av omsorgsfullt kontrollerade smådelar. De utgör blott ett fåtal av den mängd mekaniska, elektriska och hydrauliska apparater som ska in i varje flygplan. Motorerna kommer från särskilda fabriker.
The engine arrives from a separate plant.
Stadium av processen.
The three-bladed propeller can be adjusted for pitch and speed via an ingenious electrical gearbox, which was considered an engineering miracle in its time.
En sinnrik elektrisk växellåda som bara den är till ett tekniskt...
The propeller is installed with millimeter precision.
...i sitt läge precis på millimetern, annars uppstår ofelbart vibration. Regelbundet...
The hangar gates are opened and the completed plane is rolled out. Each single plane took a relatively long time to make, but when production got underway, it was not long before a row of aircraft could be lined up outside the plant. The time has now come for the factory test pilot to ensure that each aircraft meets the promised performance. Our test pilot has a radio link with an engineer on the ground.
Från markstationen till flygplanet, kom.
En flygmaskins jungfruresa är minst lika spännande som ett fartygs. Landningsställen dras in efter starten och sen prövas maskinens
Our pilot radios important data to the ground station.
Jag har fällt in landningsstället. Uppfattat.
Och när det
The final verdict, no faults, is put on the record. The plane can now be handed over to the Air Force without delay.
På bästa sätt. Vår yngsta försvarsgren.
And so Sweden's youngest line of defense becomes stronger. Each new aircraft is another link in the chain of defense that is a key part of Sweden's long tradition of armed neutrality.
Our newsreel cameras record a class of lap youngsters who ski past a squadron of B-17s during their winter exercises on the Arctic Circle.
Division som för vinterövning är förlagd hit.
They see how the engines are preheated in the extreme cold before takeoff.
Med specialkonstruerade kaminer.
When one of the planes has completed a training flight, the nomadic children are allowed on board for a closer look.
Gör det med en glupsk nyfikenhet.
Like elsewhere in wartime Europe, almost everything was rationed, and the black market flourished here too. As our cinema commercial shows,
Yeah, it's about coffee. I can get you a little of the real stuff. You just follow me, it'll only cost you 50 kroner. You'll be wanting a kilo, eh? Yeah. Well, it's worth its weight in gold.
Well, I suppose so. Don't get involved with shady characters. You can avoid the black market now with a perfectly good substitute from Scania.
Kaffeersättning som Skandia. Skandia ersätter kaffe!
Damen som reser sig här bär en rutig enkel förmiddagsklänning.
not only were there substitutes for coffee, there were even alternatives to ordinary clothes, as this newsreel report shows. In this fashion show, the models are wearing cellulose-blended fibers. It may sound strange, but the Swedes were actually wearing their trees during the war. To quote the narrator, "And look at this pretty model. Homemade in the true meaning of the word." Finally, a couple of lovely evening gowns, one entirely black with sequins, and one all in pink, which of course requires a perfect figure to do justice to its lines, and this demand is certainly fully met here. And now a gown for a grand ball. Its deep green color truly reflects its origins in our Swedish pine.
In the summer of 1942, the prototype of the Saab 18 was flown under a heavy veil of secrecy. The only information released stated that the plane consisted of 530 meters of sheet metal, 200,000 rivets, 10 kilometers of cable, and 600 springs. One version of the Saab 18 became the fastest all-metal bomber in the world. A total of 242 units were built, and the last one remained in service until 1959. While the B-18 was still in full production, the prototype of the Saab's new interceptor, the Saab 21, was being built. The propeller's position made it necessary to equip the Saab 21 with a catapult seat, one of the first planes in the world to have this feature. For the first, and perhaps only time, a catapult seat was tested by someone wearing a ski cap and overcoat and sitting on a briefcase. The first flight for the Saab 21 took place on July the 30th, 1943. The flight almost ended in catastrophe, since the brakes did not release, and the takeoff was much longer than planned. Test pilot Klaus Smith, however, managed to get the plane into the air, but the landing gear hit a fence at the end of the runway. This explains the somewhat ungainly landing. The country had now adjusted itself to shortages, and to keep things running, there were some weird and wonderful inventions, like these charcoal gas-powered cars. Others learned to ride a bike again.
The people's morale was kept up in many ways. A newsreel shows Prime Minister Per Albin Hansson rolling the first ball in the Swedish bowling championships. Our commentator remarks that His Excellency is in fine form, and his fighting spirit is an example to all of us.
It's now 1944, and the Allies are preparing to invade Europe. On June the 6th, the first troops are landed on the Normandy beaches.
A year later, the announcement of peace was greeted with universal joy. People thronged the streets in carnival fashion. Years of rationing and shortages were at last over. Sweden's so-called frontline soldiers returned to civilian life again. This drawing by Saab designer Sixten Sarsen illustrates one product the company had in mind for peacetime production: prams made of sheet metal. Others were spinning rods, prefabricated houses, and kitchen equipment. The final choice was cars. In 1946, the very first Saab prototype was shown to an interested board of directors. The prototype car was clearly inspired by aircraft designers. It was advanced for its time with front-wheel drive and a monocoque body. To find out as much as possible quickly, it was test-driven day and night in 3 shifts. The results of these tests were used for the development of the production car, the Saab 92, which was shown to the press on June the 10th, 1947. Meanwhile, the Swedish newsreels captured the arrival of another new Saab, a highly maneuverable and versatile light aircraft that was to be used in a variety of ways. In 1947, Swedish crack pilot Carl Gustaf von Rosen made his record flight from Stockholm to Addis Ababa in a Saab Sapphire. The Sapphire was later to play an important role in the Ethiopian Air Force. Now there were Saabs on land, in the air, and at sea, the company having produced 250 aluminium rowing boats. The newsreel cameras were, of course, on hand when the twin-engine Saab Scania landed at Stockholm Airport. The new Saab airliner had been abroad on a demonstration tour and had attracted well-justified attention. Saab then had orders for some 70 Scania planes, and it was the company's intention to enter the competition for the world market for medium-sized airliners.
Sedan tänker man hålla en fabrikationstakt av 6 till 10 plan i månaden. Och nu är det alltså meningen att hela Sverige ska kasta sig in i storkonkurrensen.
The smart-looking plane had a range of 1,800 kilometers and could carry 24 to 32 passengers at a maximum speed of 425 kilometers per hour.
Det kan befordra 24 till 32 passagerare och maximifarten är 425 kilometer i timmen.
But in the shadow of the Cold War, it became necessary for Saab to divert a major effort to the military sector. While awaiting the design of a completely new aircraft, the Saab 21 was fitted with a jet engine in place of the pusher propeller. On September the 1st, 1948, the Saab 29, the so-called flying barrel, flew for the first time. With the arrival of the 29, the Swedish Air Force was to become the fourth largest in the world, quite an achievement for a country of Sweden's size. More than 650 flying barrels were made, and they became synonymous with the strength and strike power of the Swedish Air Force. But there were other good strikers too. The Swedish football team won the gold medal in the 1948 Olympic Games in London. And in 1950, the Saab 92 finally arrived on the market. And simultaneously, Saab began entering its new car in motorsports events. In 1952, Greta Molander and Saab's engine designer Rolf Melder drove separate cars in the Monte Carlo Rally. Greta won the Ladies' Cup. Back in the air again, and back in the newsreels, with a report of a new world record for Saab. Captain Anders Westerlund has just completed a non-stop flight Uppsala-Sundsvall in a flying barrel. The distance was exactly 500 kilometers, and the time just 30 minutes and 42 seconds, which gave him an average speed of 977 kilometers per hour. The record was previously held by an American Sabre jet. This is Snoddes Nordgren, Sweden's own Frank Sinatra, in the early 50s incredibly popular. And in the aircraft workshops, a replacement for the Saab 18, the Saab 32 Lansen, was now in full production. On October the 25th, 1953, the Lansen became the first Swedish airplane to break the sound barrier. A total of 477 units of the Lansen were made. It was the same year that Dag Hammarskjöld was appointed as Secretary General to the United Nations.
Loyalty, discretion and conscience.
In October 1955, the Saab 35 Draken flew for the first time. In Linköping, now both the home of Saab head office and aircraft operations, the local populace had been woken many an early morning by the shrill sound of a line-controlled scale model Draken being tested to find out how the double delta wing would work in practice. The Draken was to replace the Flying Barrel as Sweden's interceptor and strike aircraft. In 1955, Erik Karlsson drove the Saab 92 to victory in the major Swedish rally, the Rikspokalen. And shortly after, a new model revealed to Saab's dealers in Sweden. The Saab 93, with a new three-cylinder engine developing all of 33 horsepower. The spacious and versatile interior was a strong selling point. For a while, new developments came thick and fast. Next in line was the Saab Sonnet, a two-seater open sports car. 6 units were produced. The Saab 95, a 7-seater sporty estate car. 100,000 units were produced.
Jag har det! Saab 96!
The Saab 96, with a more powerful engine, had radical design changes. 500,000 units were produced. First place, second place, third place, fourth place. The 96 became a big winner in motorsport events in the early 60s. In 1960, Erik Karlsson won the British RAC Rally.
but for the outright victors, the VIP treatment in full. Eric Carlson of Sweden, Stuart Turner of Great Britain, and their gallant little Saab. A splendid combination score a famous victory.
The first of 3 straight victories in this major rally. And in 1962 and 1963, Eric scored outright victories in the classic Monte Carlo Rally. The Saab 105 was originally designed for civilian purposes. But when the first flight was undertaken in the summer of 1963, the Swedish Air Force had already become interested, and the 105 was now developed for military use. In 1969, the first man set foot on the moon. But it was also an important year in Saab's history. It was in 1969 that the merger took place between Saab and Scania Vabis, a company with a history dating back to 1891. Scania is one of the world's leading makers of heavy trucks and buses. The new company was named Saab Scania, and Marcus Wallenberg became chairman of the board. The year before, Saab had bought Malmö Flygindustri, makers of the MFI-15 propeller planes. From idea to reality, the Saab 37 Viggen was flown for the first time in 1967, and during the 70s, various versions were put into service throughout the country.
And now we interrupt for an important message. Is the owner of car B63343 in the theatre? If so, we'd be grateful if you'd move it. It's attracting a large crowd which is blocking traffic. It's a new red Saab 99.
Thus ran the first cinema commercial for the new Saab 99. 20 years of experience in the manufacture of cars and 400,000 hours of engineering work lay behind the birth of the Saab 99. With its many innovations, Saab had set new standards in the automotive world. The Saab Turbo concept was a great boost to sales at the end of the 70s. And the arrival of the 900 series put Saab firmly into the upper segment of the market. It also marked the start of Saab's international success. As one motoring journalist wrote, you could still see the Saab 900 was a Saab car, and that it was related to the Saab 99. But in some ways, it was sexier. It's now January the 25th, 1983. The pilots are given the traditional Swedish kick for good luck before the maiden flight of the Saab SF-340. The SF-340 is one of the largest projects ever undertaken by a Swedish industrial corporation. A low-wing airliner with twin turboprop engines, the SF-340 has space for 35 passengers. In May 1984, the world's motoring press was given its first opportunity to drive Saab's latest car, the 9000. Here, Saab's engineers had succeeded in doing what had seemed impossible, making a car that was smaller than the 900 on the outside, yet bigger inside than any Saab previously built. Many great thoughts and ideas remain as only drawings or as models. But it is the sum of all the experience gained from every idea, every drawing, and every model that never gets off the ground that provides the fund of knowledge essential for developing the high-technology products of the future.